Thank you very much for this kind introduction, Tassos. I'm happy to present this work. Just let me, also thanks for the invitation. Just let me share my screen and the presentation. I hope you can see it in a minute or in a second, hopefully. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so welcome to this talk. So I would like to talk because I was asked by Raquel to present something on my previous work on the university entrepreneurship. And so I refer to this paper on cross-faculty proximity and academic entrepreneurship, the role of business school. This is joint work together with Maximilian Goethner from the Friedrich Schiller University Jena. And we were conducting this research during the time when I was still working in Jena before. Yeah, so I'm still affiliated with Jena as an adjunct lecturer, but back then I was working full-time there. And this is also the time when most of this research was carried out. I was in the talk with Tassos before. I was just mentioning, for me, when I went through this deck of slides, because I had a presentation some time ago as well. It looks like something from a different planet, because it's about proximity, going to places, meeting people. So this is not a paper that is fitting the COVID or pandemic situation and social distancing. So this is something that, well, given the current situation, looks like something from a very completely different world. Nevertheless, eventually, and we all hope for that there will be options for this social interaction in the near future, and then eventually the results also we found here might play a role in these different contexts. Okay. So this is the background of our research when we started that some time ago, already quite some time ago. We had this idea, okay, there is a lot of this research on academic entrepreneurship, on this commercial exploitation of scientific research, and this third mission idea. We also saw a lot of these public policies, not only in the US, but also in Europe, about transforming knowledge into something that can be commercialized, and also the idea that is so typically what you have here is to promote the technology transfer, to promote the local economic development also, and we wanted to contribute to this field of literature. But as you see, there is already a lot of work done, and we also asked ourselves what would be an interesting pattern to look at. And we have a lot of this literature, and was not that easy to think about something new, but we were interested in the topic and said, okay, what about the role of the university structure for spin-off creation? We know that there is this input or these findings on the role of research quality, on financial resources, on tradition, and other things that play a role. So that explain why there are differences across universities in terms of new firm formation. And an open question, as we found it back then, was that this question: what is the structural characteristics that determine the emergence of entrepreneurial ideas in the first place? So this is not about the final startup, but about the initial emergence of an idea that later on is transformed into a new venture. Technically we found it interesting because a lot of the research in the past also looks into startups that were at some point after graduation, 5 years, for example, or later, that came into being quite some time after the people left the university. And it might be difficult to make this link between university and the final startup, because there's also a lot of interferences in between. And here we look really in a situation where the people involved in this entrepreneurial idea are more or less, still active for the university or recently graduated. I will say more about that later, but that was just the technical part. And we also here were interested into, the activities or in the structural characteristics, not only at the university level, but also at the faculty level. So this is another important aspect. Yeah, so this is about the very first steps, about the initial business idea here. And this is then, yeah, one of the new things I mentioned, the faculty level. So we are treating in our empirical analysis, not the universities as a unit of observation, but the faculty at the university. Of course, faculties are nested within universities, and we also account for these university differences. But the prime focus is really the faculty level. And we are interested in the role of cross-faculty spillovers. So this is the role of co-location of different faculties for the generation of these new ideas. And this is born out of this observation, I would say, that, I mean, yeah, in Jena University, for example, but also in Groningen and many other places, you already have these type of programs where, for example, there's a so-called prototype seminar where students from engineering and the business school come together to develop a product or a marketing strategy as a part of their curricula. In Groningen, we also have these university minors where you have students from management and faculty of engineering and science together in the classroom working together. And I think there's further initiatives also at the employee level in universities. So there is, yeah, also this idea also to stimulate some of that. And yeah, and we want to look into the effects, whether these cross-faculty spillovers are promoted by having these faculties in close spatial proximity for a number of reasons, which I will explain in a minute. And what we look into is, as I said, not the final startup, but in the so-called Exist Business Startup Grant. So this is a German program. So that is university members are eligible to apply for this startup grant. And the idea is to develop a final business or a new firm out of that. So, and we look at these successful applications for this, which is already a shortcoming in some sense. We cannot look into the failed ones. I say that up front to clarify that also. So we look into these yeah, approved startup grants, if you want. And we have some information on these grants and also, yeah, the origin, so at which faculty these grants or to which faculties these grants are assigned. And this is the source for the analysis also. Let me also, yeah, and if you have any questions in between, just ask me. So that's okay for me. Let me tell you an example about the cross-faculty spillovers. So we have here the natural science faculty nested within the university. It has certain structural characteristics, size, the third-party funding, especially from private parties that might play a role for entrepreneurship or for the emergence of entrepreneurial idea. And then you have also other faculties close by. For example, the business school. So this is the focus we have here. Also, we look descriptively into all different types of combinations of cross-faculty location. But our focus will be on business schools for several reasons, which I will explain then as well. And the idea is that given this co-location and business idea is emerging, why the focus on business school? That is because we know from the literature, and there's a lot of good arguments there that these business schools are particularly helpful for developing entrepreneurship ideas. So the guiding idea for the whole project was that there's expertise from different scientific fields, and this needs, yeah, and you need to bring this together to develop entrepreneurial ideas, or at least sometimes this co-location can be helpful to come up with new ideas. So it doesn't mean that you always need to combine knowledge from different faculties, but if you have these co-location patterns, then you have a markup in these new idea creation. So that's the point. And this is also the narrative that is written down on this slide. So we have we call them the technologists, so a member of the natural science and engineering science faculty that is developing some technology, for example, an employee, but also a master student in the final master thesis, practical master thesis project, for example. And yeah, these technologists could meet with other university members in the real world. And they could meet like with a manager, as we call them, that's a member of the business administration faculty, who might know how to introduce a product into the market. It could also be an expert in patent law from the Faculty of Law, but it could also be people with expertise in product design, so members of the Faculty of Culture and Arts. And that is also yeah, under this umbrella here. And yeah, due to such social context at the local university level, so these technologists could then become aware and develop an idea. So that's one channel. Another channel could be that entrepreneurial teams are formed with members of other faculties. Or you could simply draw on this local expertise. So you have already maybe an idea, but you give it this idea not full speed because yeah, you might lack local expertise. But if you have it close by or in your yeah, in proximity, then this might fuel this entrepreneurial idea you have. So this is not to say it upfront about team formation or any other specific channel, also because we do not have, unfortunately, very detailed data on that. But we also allude here to a huge, or let's say to different mechanisms. So it's not only team formation, it can be also drawing on local expertise and simply also becoming aware of entrepreneurial ideas. All right. I see something in the chat. May I also answer to that in between? I could try, but I cannot. Now I can see the chat. Yeah, how important is the autonomy of the business school? Is the question. Presumably too much autonomy, too little contact with other faculties. Yeah, okay, so that's clear. We also, what I can say about these business school specifics here is that indeed we also look into these some characteristics, but I also have to say, and this is also when I prepared for the talk, I also need to explain a bit that eventually the way we're measuring it is something that is also not possible in every context, or let's say in every country, because maybe business schools have a very particular standing or nature. But my pragmatic view on that would be, okay, then in these countries you need to additionally control for this somehow empirically. But it's a fair point that business school characteristics matter as well. I will say more about that also later on. So as I said, our focus is on business schools. So we are not looking into potential links with other faculties for the sake of, that we also had some, constraints in the sense of developing the story. It's already was a challenge to do that for one type of cross-faculty spillover. So our focus in this project was then really on the role of business school, as the title also states. Here we have the arguments on proximity and cross-faculty spillovers. So it's not, so we're not talking about the very fact of having a business school or the very fact of having a natural science. It's more about how close together are these two, domains, or these two faculties. The argument, and this is derived from theory from economic geography and regional economics, that the effectiveness of this knowledge, cross-faculty knowledge flows from business school should depend on the spatial proximity. So you can think about agglomeration externalities, which are increasing this frequency of face-to-face interaction. So you simply enhance the chance that people meet and eventually learn from each other or form teams at a later point. So this is referring to this idea of labor market matching, sharing of knowledge, effective learning. We also know that the spatial distance is related to the costs of communication and also to the benefits of social interaction in the university context. So this also should play a positive role. There is also huge or abundant evidence on this. And we also know, and this is maybe most important here from a theoretical point of view, that we have this geographic bounding of knowledge transmission processes, so that there is a distance decay in knowledge transfer. which is also evidenced by several different streams of literature. And this is not something bound to economics or geography. There's also some sociological and psychological theories that are playing a role here. One thing, because we also touched upon that in the talk in the beginning when I was talking with Tassos. So we focus here on spatial proximity, of course, and you see the Boschma reference here. Of course, we have this cognitive and institutional proximity, which we do not capture, or we do not focus on here. But this could also eventually be a substitute or a different type of or a different facilitator of these cross-faculty spillover, or it might be something that can substitute spatial proximity if arranging a spatial proximity is not possible for many reasons. Okay, and now we come to the tricky part, and this is something empirically working social scientists facing all the time. We are confronted with this issue of endogeneity here. And I was mentioning that in the beginning already. Yeah, of course, universities are doing it. They strategically promote eventually proximity, or they have all these programs with prototype seminars, university minors open for different faculties and so on. And of course, then it's no wonder that there might be some effect, but this is not the effect we want to identify. This is always difficult then to estimate or to provide an estimate about the underlying relationship. So there might be, for example, this upward bias if we do not control for that. And what we are doing to circumvent this strategical positioning of faculty buildings in this case is to look into or to use an instrument. So this is a very simple instrument variable estimation, where we look into the age of universities as an instrument for proximity. And here I have to say, as a type of disclaimer, we are using the German context, and I would say in the German context, age of university might make a lot of sense. But I can understand if you look into other contexts like the UK, for example, then this might not work to the same degree. If you think about some very well-known universities that are also of older age, where this might be a bit different. But that's eventually a different story. So, but for the validity of the instrument, it's only important that it works in the context investigated. But of course, it might work differently in different places. So the main message or the main idea behind the age instrument is that young universities are more campus-like, where you have a lot of facilities and faculties close by, while old universities are more likely to be sprawled over the place. And then we have in the paper developed this historical narrative about that. So and then going back to the case of Germany, so the first universities emerged in the late 14th century, early 15th century, and back then, of course, only a tiny share of the population was studying, and of course, there was no natural science, there was no engineering. So you hardly needed huge facilities to cater these people studying and working at a university. And if these facilities were placed in the city center, then there were, over the centuries, a lot of idiosyncratic city development around these original facilities. And then we, at some point, are in the 19th century, then natural science is emerging, engineering, technical universities are emerging. And of course, typically, it is difficult to co-locate to these humanities in the city center because there was these city development around these centers constraining opportunities for co-location. Particularly if these new faculties require some space for laboratories, equipment, like in natural science. A classical example in Germany would be the Technical University of Munich, where you have the business school part and the humanities in the city center, while engineering natural sciences in Garching, which is a suburb where you need to can go by commuter train, which is about 45 minutes or so from the city center. And this is a classical example, but there's also different other cases where you can observe that. Of course, one issue here is, maybe I can say it up front, of course, the bombing during the Second World War might also play a role then. But here, one of the things to mention is that especially these industrial towns that were heavily bombed were those places that didn't have a pre-1945 university. So today, all of these cities have universities, but they were mainly developed post-war. Also after some of the city was redeveloped already in the 50s and 60s. So this is not really playing a huge role. I think in some of the models we controlled for the share of destroyed houses in the Second World War, which didn't affect our main analysis, but this is just some technical details. So the idea is the older the university, the more likely there is some sprawl and there is a huge distance between faculties. Okay, then we have the database. This is the Exist Business Startup Grant, and this is where we have data on. This is a main policy instrument in Germany that is also part of the or is financed by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Also within the ESF, European Union Fund. And the idea here is to provide some personal assistance to people that are developing a business model for testing the economic viability and to secure the required resources. So it's not a spectacular high amount of money you receive from it. So this is not venture capital like investment, but it is something to develop the idea while, for example, still working at a university. And you have this free access to university infrastructure and office space, which is also helpful if you need very expensive machinery when you can, for example, then develop your prototypes with these machines that are available in the university technology centers, for example. So this is the idea behind that. So it's this is the outcome, or this is making the outcome variable at the end. So this is really this emergence of an entrepreneurial idea. And what we have access to is the information to which faculties these projects are assigned. And so we can make this analysis at the faculty level. But yeah, before turning to these details again, so who's eligible? Maybe that's all scientists, university graduate, former academic associates. And this is also something that is really limited to high potential startup projects. There's an external evaluation. This is not about every type of necessity self-employed, because I don't know, recent graduate find difficulties on the job market because of a recession also. This is really related to or limited to high potential startup projects. We focus here on the successful startup grants because this is where we have information about. And it's difficult to the information, to get this information, because it's often not that well documented about these failed applications. This is, of course, some limitation we have to live with. So this is more or less the situation. But at least there is one external agency that is listed in the first line here that is responsible. So there is no inter-rater difference in the quality. So it's always the same agency. Of course, there are different people evaluating, but it's the same agency. And this is an independent agency, at least independent from universities. All right, so the dependent variable is the number of these business startup grants per faculty and year over these eligible university members within the faculty. So these faculty members I should have written. The information is on the executing unit and the year of the grant application. And this is combined with some federal statistics on university that has information on the students, the academic personnel, third-party funding, and so on. And then there's participation in Exist program. So this is the Exist as such is a huge program. So every member of a German university can apply for this startup grant, this Exist startup grant. But besides, there's also the Exist program as such, and this is some selected universities get some funding, non-permanent funding for promoting entrepreneurship more structurally in their universities. And this is something you need to control for, because this is showing the entrepreneurial attitude of the university. We had to restrict to public universities, which in a German setting is not a big deal, because there's only few private universities, and this is not really playing a very, or let's say there's no, and typically this is only specialized universities. You have a private university for business, or the private university for political science, but it's not that you have full universities that are entirely private. So, and we also couldn't look into universities of applied sciences. That the reason is that these are very spread out across. So you have let's say 3 or 4 different places with a campus, and there it was very difficult to assign that. So because often these universities of applied science are part of a local development policy, so that smaller towns can claim to be a university town by having a campus with 100 students, and this is very difficult to analyze that in a certain way. And we also couldn't look into medical science, which is a severe limitation, but here the issue was that we couldn't often disentangle between the hospital, the university hospital, and the faculty. And this is very different in different universities in Germany. This is another thing we could look into. A lot of details. So at the end, what do we have? It's more than 2,000 faculty year observations for all the different faculties that we look into. And what is the proximity to business school? And here we took the distance in walking minutes to other faculties. So we built clusters of important facilities for each faculty that can be regarded as centers of research and teaching. We simply took the mail addresses of 4 largest sites of these faculties and had some brave student assistants doing some work for us to also calculate this distance in walking minutes. And finally, we also, what we did, not because we want to hide something, we restricted to natural and engineering, because this is where most of the startup took place, where you had a lot of these activities. But there's also, apart from that, some technical argument, especially in various humanities, where you have the Institute for Polish Studies or the Institute for Danish Culture, for example, which is spread out all over the place, and it's very difficult to form these type of clusters. So we also had some constraints there, but at the same time, there were hardly any startup grants in these type of fields. So so this is the empirical strategy. I might skip over that. It's a very almost textbook-like approach. We used in the OLS regression this proximity to business school, and then in this IV regression to control for this endogeneity problem, we only at the second stage looked at the proximity that is due to the university age to estimate the effect on these startup grants per faculty. All right. We had several control variables for entrepreneurial traditional industry funding, whether university was a technical university, the size, the regional level of entrepreneurship, the share of students, third-party funding, and we also looked into planning region, time-year interaction. So planning region is the labor market region, so to capture all these labor market region effects. And this is some descriptives. So the startup grants per faculty in year. So that means, so we have for every faculty in year an observation per university, and for natural science, 38% of all observations, there was at least one startup grant. It could also be 10 or 5, but it is a non-zero for 38% of the cases. For engineering, it's 28%. For social sciences, 21.6%. And for humanities, you see it's the same for arts and culture and sports science, a relatively low share. So we focused then on natural science and engineering. And this is the OLS results. We summarized what we did here. So we have the dependent variables access rate, so this share of grants per eligible university faculty members. We run the analysis for all Germany, so for East and West, but then we also focused more on West Germany. Also throughout the review process, and also during our own observations, we observed that the results are behaving well with West Germany, but less so for including East Germany. And there could be plenty of arguments that we can also refer to the literature to argue. Especially during the socialist period, there was a lot of structural transformation of the university landscape in Eastern Germany that may have impacted on this historically grown structures. And you see, for example, here in a specification 3 for the natural sciences that the distance to business schools is negatively related to this the number of startups. So the further away the business schools, the lower the startups or these business ideas emerging in natural science. So this is confirming for natural science that there is a link. So having a business school close by is promoting entrepreneurial ideas or the emergence thereof in natural science faculties. It's not working for engineering science, as you can see in the panel B. So there is not such a link. This is against our expectation and hypothesis. That's something we can only speculate post hoc about. So that means so one argument could be that the knowledge developed within engineering is already practically oriented as such that you didn't need necessarily an additional manager from the business school to develop that any further. As a side remark, we also find a negative effect of, which is not shown here, but in the appendix of the paper, I think, there is a negative effect a positive effect of distance to the technology transfer office. That means the further away the technology transfer office, the more startups there are. We were talking to the people from the TTO in Jena back then, and they told us this might be the case that if you are close to the engineers in natural science, then colleagues might observe that you go to this office, and then there's rumors. What is he planning or she planning, and that's why they also are very happy to be far away from the faculties. And in Jena, it's the case. They're really the technology transfer office is in a very nice house built in the 19th century, is somewhere almost in the suburbs. But that is also the preferred option for many of the engineers in natural science, because then their colleagues are not observing them entering the rooms of the technology transfer office, which can sometimes be an issue. But this is just a side remark. Okay, it's not working for engineering science, but for natural science. And then we run the analysis for this IV. So we have here the first and the second stage. On the left side, the first and then the second stage. What we observe for natural science, again, there is a positive link between age and distance to university. So the older the university, the farther away are natural science faculties from business schools. And in the second stage, again, you see this link that was observed in the OLS as well. The coefficient estimates are relatively similar, we would argue, but of course, there might be a little bias, but the results are robust in this IV. For engineering, we see a similar pattern for the age, so this is as expected, but then again, for the second stage, there is not really a relationship. Okay, then of course, what is most important, what is often said to be most important, you can discuss about it, does the exclusion restriction hold? So the instrument is relevant. This was clear from the analysis, but here here the issue could be that the age of a university is directly related to the emergence of entrepreneurial ideas, and this is not what you want to have a valid estimation strategy. You have not a hard test on that, as you know, but you could do some additional analysis to at least compel, in this case, the reviewers, but in general, the audience, that there is no such violation of the exclusion restriction. What we did is to use as a additional analysis to use the dependent variable participation in Exist1 program. Exist1 is the first structural program, so this university-wide structural program. It was introduced in the 1990s, And the argument was universities that were on board with this very first program, these are really the ones that have an entrepreneurial tradition. And hopefully it's not the universities of a certain age, because that would then be a violation, an obvious violation of our argument. And then there's also an alternative model where we have the participation in the structural program at any point in the observation period. Luckily, there is no link, and you see huge standard errors here also. So age of university and the likelihood of having this entrepreneurial tradition or having a high entrepreneurial tradition is not supported by this. So this is good news. And then you could, of course, also argue, yeah, maybe the age of universities is in generally related to the commercial orientation. Maybe in an old university, you are not interested in third-party funding from private sector and so on. So what we also did here is we looked into this age of university and the private sector share of third-party funding, but also the third-party funding per professor. We see some, at least for the models where we also include East Germany, but no control variables. We see some relationship, but in a moment where we control for the structural characteristics, but also or when we restrict to West Germany, there's no link between age of university and this commercial orientation. So again, we cannot, this is not an issue. We have also some robustness checks. So we exclude universities in this robustness that participate in the structural programs. We exclude pure campus universities, because then here also, if we want to rule out that it's a pure campus effect in some sense. We also disregard very small and large faculties. And we also dropped some outliers. So the upper 1%, this rate of distribution and the lower one. And these results were stable. Yeah, also with a count data model, but also when adding the startup grants from the business school, because you could argue, yeah, well, you have a joint idea, and then it's not assigned to the natural science, but for some reason it's assigned to the business school. And what we at least did to circumvent, let's say, at least this point of critique, we added both together, and the results are stable as well. And we also had placebo analysis, because you could argue maybe in general there's the distance to any faculty plays a role and not a business school. So what we did is we also run an analysis with the proximity between natural science and ICT faculties. And they're same for arts and culture and sports science, but there's hardly any effect here. So this gives some confidence that our business school effect captures not a general proximity, but a distance to this managerial commercial knowledge, which is important for entrepreneurial ideas. So that's already the end of the presentation here. To summarize, so the results demonstrate that the level of activities is positively, natural science is positively affected by proximity. It appears to be that this combination of technological knowledge and managerial knowledge matters. So we contribute to this literature on university entrepreneurship by looking into this very early stage of the process, and also provide some insight on the role of university structures, and which is also adding then a new aspect to this knowledge spillover theory. A limitation, one of the limitations, we cannot identify the exact channel. Is it this team formation? Is it just drawing on expertise, getting ideas just by serendipitous meetings? So this is something we cannot really observe, also because there's some very limited personal information on the data. So what is the future research, and finally the policy implications? So of course we need to understand more these structural characteristics and cross-faculty spillovers. Also we need to integrate failed applications or failed startups, and measuring this relational proximity or this institutional cognitive proximity as well in more detail. So finally, most important for policy. So why should we know that? So when we had this research or started that, at least in Germany, there was this huge discussion on specialization of universities. So every university needed to specialize in certain domains. I remember in Jena, it's the 3 L's: light, life, liberty. So light because they are good in optics and photonics, and then in life sciences they are very good, and in liberty, this is then the humanity branch. So this was a debate back then, and one issue could be that the specialization may reduce the scope for cross faculties below, but it may also reduce the scope to fulfill this technology transfer function. So in the first place, the idea was to maybe strengthen the role of the university, but it might come at a cost of losing out on these cross-faculty spillovers. And this reduced faculty diversity may be detrimental to technology transfer potential. So yeah, the solution would be to carefully consider, also to promote this third mission by a thoughtful development of the faculty portfolio of universities. So these cross-faculty spillovers should be taken into account when redesigning universities, for example, in the post-COVID world. Okay, thanks for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was very interesting for me, and I'm sure for a lot of others. Can I invite people to either raise their hand or put a comment in the chat to ask a question? And whilst people are thinking about it, I may use my rights to suggest a couple of things. The first is there is an opportunity, if there is an opportunity from what is happening over the last year, there is an opportunity to see whether this proximity has to do with spatial proximity or cognitive, as we discussed before we start, that there is a good case of checking whether the fact that people are within the same university makes a difference as well. And the other aspect, and I may have missed this, is Germany has a lot of federal funding, and I think this extends to universities as well. So can you control somehow to the availability of funding to a university or a faculty? For example, what I'm saying is, if this project is the only project that a university can draw funding from, there will be a lot more effort trying to get it. So there will be more applications or more focus on success. Whilst if it is a much broader, if it's one part of a much broader range of funding available to a faculty, then it may be less inclined, has less success rate.
Yeah, so thanks for this point. So there is a different funding structure. So I mean, mostly the universities are funded by the federal states, so not by the central government, but the federal state within the 16 different states, and that's also why you have differences. So you have poorer states and richer states, and therefore you also have differences in university quality and availability of funding. So this is one thing, of course, regarding these exist program, the structural program. This is a federal program. So this is, in some areas, but this is then really region specific. This is maybe the main source because the universities in a state where there's hardly any state level funding. But this also depends to some degree. For example, in the Eastern German states, at least in the recent EU funding period, most of these states had below the 75% average European Union income, so they had a lot of these funding from the European funds, and then the states typically were using this money for developing programs at university level for entrepreneurship. So I think it is. So I would say every university is facing a different financing constraint or option, whatever. So the pragmatical answer would be that we try to control for these labor market effects. So let's say a labor market which is always nested within a federal state, and so our argument is that we can fairly capture that. Another point is the local industry. So if you are in a poor state, there is hardly any sponsorship from the local industry. But in Munich, for example, Siemens is very active, or there's some other companies in the high-tech area that also are working together with universities, etc. So there is a different pool. So, but I think we somehow capture that with these regional fixed effects. Yeah.
Thank you very much. John, you wanted to ask your question in person?
Yes, it's just what having done this work, what actions should university leaders and local regional agencies take to maximize the impact and startup? I didn't really quite catch, you know, where the policy take on all of this was.
Yeah. So actually, so we can only refer here to a small piece of this overall strategy. Namely, for example, if you're in a situation to redevelop the university structures to take care that there is well, enough, let's say, options for promoting these encounters between people from different faculties, and to promote also in cross-faculty projects in terms of, for example, these type of prototype seminars. So in a way, we see this research also more as analyzing what is already there, but trying to isolate the true underlying effect in a sense. One issue we faced also with this maximization is here that this is also coming from other research we did here, is that often the problem faced by universities is not so much to encourage people to start firms, but to keep them in the region in the long run. So, for example, in the case of Jena, there is the Bauhaus University close by in Weimar, which is good in design, architecture, and so on. And once the minister of the state of Thuringia was asking us, when we did an evaluation study there, why should we fund these people? After 3 years, they are all going to Berlin because Berlin is the startup city. So why should we fund them? And then they all go to Berlin. So I think what is also important is that the universities might work together with local agencies to, especially in thin labor markets, to provide, to provide more incentives to remain in the region. So the number is one thing, but I think we more face the issue, and we could confirm that in our analysis when we asked the technology transfer from this Bauhaus University. We had all these students here, but yeah, look, if you Google them, they are all now based in Berlin in some fancy quarters and developing their whatever. Web design and creative industries. So that's another thing. I think the other bottleneck is really to keep these people in the region also.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. David, Charles, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so it's just interested really that the approach you've taken, does it give you any evidence of what is the nature of the connections that there are between these science faculties and the business schools? There's an assumption there that the proximity leads to some connection, but I'm left very unclear what the nature of that is. Is it that people have actually done some sort of course in the business school about entrepreneurship, or is there a business school collaborator in the project? I mean, what is the actual tangible nature of that connection, or is there just by chance, that because they're close, there's an assumption that there's some connection, but there might not be?
Yeah, that's a very. I mean, that you allude to one of the main limitations. We cannot really disentangle or isolate a specific mechanism. So we have this different. It could be this team formation. It could be also the drawing on local expertise. What we tried in a second step, but it's also very difficult to collect this information. We started to look into some of these projects. So this was not really at a very deep level. So we looked into these projects and we Googled whether there were real firms emerging out of that, and we checked the profile of the founders behind that, whether they have a degree in management and a degree in some engineering. And what we could confirm at this more general level is that there is the team formation seems to be the driver, which is also, let's say, a preferred interpretation, but this is not something we have done in this study. But what we can confirm at a more qualitative analysis level is that it is often that there is some team formation. What we do not know is how these teams get in contact in the first place, whether they met at a startup fair or in the classroom, because here we lack certain information. And I think this would be a study that we would be interested also in the future to look more at this level in more detail.
I just speculate perhaps if you're looking at startup teams of students from 2 different faculties, it might be best to look at where they live.
Yeah, if we have the information, then that's perfect. I mean, what we could do is some qualitative interviews and try to gather this information from these startup teams. That would be ideal to learn more about these mechanisms. But I think that would be a good approach to look at this.
Thank you very much. Simon?
Thanks very much for that presentation. I enjoyed that. I guess I've got a few comments, but my overarching question is really going to be about whether there are significant contextual differences between, where you've studied and the UK. Just conceptually, first of all, my understanding of agglomeration economies conceptually is that a lot of the work being done by David Adresh and others is on inter-organizational proximity. So you have, I think, but it's useful to validate this, that it's studying separate organizations, different firms and public and private interactions where the organizational boundary needs to be spanned for a cluster, and that's where the proximity effects are most noted. Here we're talking about an intra-organizational context where I suspect, and this may be a contextual question, but I suspect structural mechanisms and incentives and governance structures, including resource allocation structures, are potentially more important to influence and shape the amount of cross-fertilization. So if I jump straight from the conceptual to the practical, I used to be dean of our business school, and the college structure and the school structure and the resourcing really do work against, for example, programs which take faculty from 2 colleges to teach students, for example, innovation, technology management, entrepreneurship, and engineering. And we attempted this several times because we saw a big market for this. And these largely failed on the basis of the governance structures, the resourcing, and the allocation of faculty. So there are structural impediments to territorial divisions of labor. And that's interesting because when we did certain projects, for example, an entrepreneurship project with engineering based on how you market and sell new Formula One technologies with teams that came from the MBA program and the engineering faculty, they were very successful. But let me step back again. I've done a study for the ESRC and the British Academy of Management quite recently, actually, and this is on the role of business schools as an interface between departments and faculty and other disciplines and businesses in the UK. What this revealed through some data analysis of KEF and HEBC and a variety of other data sets we have available is that there's massive differences according to different universities as to the degree of spin-out startups and IP that they have relative to their total revenue and total outputs. But secondly, there's a massive difference in those indicators across business schools. Frankly, some business schools focus fairly strongly on large firms, executive programs, MBAs, and they often have negligible or no entrepreneurship faculty. Others, Aston is a good example in our region, are very focused on SME mentoring, business support development, and they work with the rest of the university in that way. So this variety and the connection to that or to national incentives, Bayes has recently put in a lot of money through business schools to engage in local business. Some of that's for startups and spin-outs. I imagine the context is quite different from Germany and other places, and maybe that's part of what I'm articulating here.
Yeah, I think business schools, thanks for providing this context, because I also think that I think in between there was also the question in the chat. Yeah, the business schools, I mean, typically in Germany, they are not a business school. So also from an institutional point of view, they are a faculty of business administration. So they are not separated. So I think they are more aligned with the structure of other faculties, or have a similar structure like other faculties. So maybe that's a very context-specific aspect as well. And that's also, well, I think, so my pragmatic answer would be that in another country context, you need to control for different things to identify effects. But I presume that the story might be more complex than also in the UK with these different types of business schools. I also think that I think we have in one of the robustness checks, I think we have an information on whether the faculty has a chair for promoting entrepreneurship. Because then there is a lot of programs as well, but of course it's again a black box, and there's quality differences between these chairs. But at least we could integrate that. But my message would be I could not one-to-one apply this empirical framework to the UK, but there needs to be some adjustments to properly measure these cross-faculty spillovers. And I also think maybe for this age instrument, but there's plenty of things that need to be calibrated for making such an analysis. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And very promptly, it's 2:00 in the UK. I would like to thank Michael. This will be the end of our seminar. And thank you very much for joining us. In 2 weeks' time, we have Levi Wolf on predictive models and the role for space and place. And with this, if you have any further questions or comments, feel free to forward them to either us at City-REDI or Michael directly. I'm sure he will be more than happy to take further questions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for joining and listening, and have a good day ahead.
Thank you. You too.